from West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Support for the Legislature Today is provided by AARP West Virginia, your ally for real possibilities in the Mountain State. Learn more at aarp.org/WV. The Charleston Gazette-Mail, using its CGM app to deliver the latest news, traffic, and weather alerts, keeping you in the know while you're on the go. Lumos Networks, online at lumosnetworks.com. West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. Orion Strategies, professional public relations, government affairs, creative services, and research and polling, with offices in Charleston, Buchanan, Martinsburg, Pittsburgh, and Columbus.
Good evening and welcome to the Legislature Today from the State Capitol building. This week we've seen a teacher and school workers strike, the death of a controversial education bill, and a campus carry gun bill zooming through the House of Delegates. I'll be joined by State House reporter colleagues in just a minute to talk about all of that, but first a public hearing this morning on what's been called the Clean Salary Bill. Pay raises for teachers, school workers, and state troopers. The bill easily passed the House this afternoon, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, some of the passionate remarks in this morning's public hearing.
I believe at this time that those that went on strike should be removed from the bill and allow only for the state police to have their raise. Later, when the time comes for teachers to receive their raise, it should be accompanied with education and system reform. We heard during the running of SB 451 that teachers did not ask for a raise and they did not want one if it meant giving parents a choice and a voice. If parents have no right to choose how and where their child is educated, why should we approve a raise for those same people that hold those children hostage?
If and when our students in the state of West Virginia start scoring nationally below 30%, I would lobby for you a 25% pay raise. But right now, we're scoring 48th. And the way to a brighter future for the child and for the state is through education. That's the most important thing we can do for our children, is give them a good education. But they can't do it if we have the unions controlling our teachers.
I stand here before you a proud product of public education. I graduated from Cabell Midland High School in 1999, from Marshall University in 2003. I am a Republican, but most importantly, I am a stay-at-home Christian mother that is in complete support of public education and of Bill 2730. I am here today questioning why this bill is even being debated. Our teachers and service personnel deserve a raise. They deserve a great deal more than what is being offered.
Now, the critical question here is to West Virginia families, West Virginia taxpayers, and West Virginia students, what are we getting out of that $68 million? Well, for starters, we certainly aren't getting any alternatives to an education system that faces myriad challenges and isn't meeting the needs of every student or family it serves. We've seen this week that even introducing a rounding error's worth of choice to some of the least advantaged among us is a non-starter for those who defend the status quo.
First of all, I'm opposed to this pay raise at this time. Our choices have been taken away from us. The students, parents, and teachers have been left behind. The unions are the only ones that are benefiting from this, and they are the great manipulators.
Teachers did not ask for this raise. It was promised by the governor, flanked on both sides by the Speaker and by the President of the Senate. They killed their own pay raise bill because they felt strongly about what was right for children. Please, let's don't get into, because I didn't get this, you don't get this mentality.
I've heard a lot of misinformation here this morning, things that are just blatant lies. The unions are not here speaking for the teachers. The teachers are voting to tell the unions how to take care of them because they don't feel like they have a voice. You can't create reform without a strong foundation.
I really don't like to use test scores as a judgment of how our students are doing until you can develop a test that adjusts for the child who hasn't eaten in 3 days that's taking it, the child that hasn't slept because they live in a homeless shelter and it's kind of noisy there and trying to sleep on that hard cot just basically sucks. Unless you can adjust for the child who just doesn't test well, like my special education students. Test scores don't really tell us everything we need to know.
Joining me now are Brad McElhaney of West Virginia Metro News and Jake Zuckerman of the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Thank you guys for being here.
No problem. Thank you.
And I wanted to say that in this morning's public hearing, 15 people spoke in favor of that pay raise bill. 8 people opposed the bill. And again, it did pass very
and they got
easily.
2 minutes to speak.
And they got 2 minutes to speak, unlike the 70 seconds that folks on Senate Bill 451 had earlier. The House bill passed today pretty easily, 89 to 8. But what we heard in the public hearing and on the floor today, still really hard feelings about the loss of that comprehensive 451. Hard feelings towards teachers by some of those who spoke. So let's first talk about that clean salary bill. This is the governor's bill. This is what the governor promised last fall.
Right, yeah, I mean, turn the clocks back to October, and it was a surprise at the time. I don't think anyone had any sort of heads up on this, and the governor just says, I'm going to put, I think it was about $100 million into PEIA, just a lump sum, and I'm going to give another 5% raise. And that was what got this ball rolling, and it was part of the omnibus, and that part of the conversation has been, I suppose, muted a little bit, but there wasn't some big grassroots knock, 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 give us a raise. I mean, this was just sort of something that was put onto the table by the governor and has snowballed from there.
And the Republican leadership was right there, was flanking the governor when he said, this is what we want to do for you.
Absolutely.
Brad, fill us out about a little bit. We're talking about the salary bill. What is the feeling among legislators? Are they wholly behind this?
Depends on which legislators you talk to and what chamber they're in. You know, that the bill did pass pretty overwhelmingly today in the House of Delegates. I don't remember the final score, but it was 80-something to 8.
89 to 8.
After a long debate, it was that broad a margin.
And we've got clips of that, but you know, just help set it up for us.
Well, you know, I mean, the House has just had a very different feeling about all of this than the Senate has. So a lot of support in the House for this pay raise bill that actually not only includes teachers, but also school service personnel and state police, because those are the 3 groups that have pay scales in state code. So they're dealt with in this one bill. But what's going to happen next is it's going to go over to the Senate, and all signs are there's going to be a very different reception for this bill in the Senate. And I've been wrong on everything so far, so I can't tell you what's going to happen, but odds are there's going to be some twist in the plot line.
And again, it's the leftover hard feelings from the loss of that very big education bill. That's where the rub is over here towards a pay raise for teachers.
Right. What seems like a month ago on Tuesday, the House of Delegates voted down that bill. Not voting on the bill itself. There was never really a vote on the bill, but a procedural motion by the minority whip, Delegate Mike Caputo of Marion County, who made a motion to delay action forever on the bill. And there was a lot of debate, but he got just enough 12 Republicans over to the Democratic side, and the bill went down in flames.
We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but that's okay. we're gonna get because a lot of the points that we've made right now, we'll see in some of the remarks that were made on that salary bill today. So let's go back to that debate this afternoon.
We will also be giving a pay raise to people who walked off the job, had a signed contract that they were supposed to be providing instruction to our students. We are going to give those people, those folks who disregarded West Virginia Code, their contract, and we're going to give them a 5% pay raise. Just keep that in mind when you vote, what you're doing. This isn't going to go away, folks, because if people can come here and demand that you only give them a pay raise and you not listen to the folks out there, the hardworking parents who pay taxes every day, to pay the salaries for those teachers, and for us, by the way. We're here to do a job for those people.
This was a promise that was made for people who never really asked for it. Because if you remember, the work stoppage last year was never about a pay raise. It was about health care. It was about PEIA. The work stoppage this year was not about a pay raise. It was about they felt there were some policies that were harmful to public education. This is a separate issue. This is about keeping promises. So I wholeheartedly support this bill, and I heard a comment earlier that there's a lot of people in West Virginia who don't have a union to stand up for them. Well, I would say this past week is a good example of why they should get one.
Jefferson was a huge proponent of public education, if you read some of his writings, but he never advocated for centralized education. He always advocated for local education at the county level in Virginia. He never said the state should get involved, and he definitely never said the federal government should get involved. And I think, that's one problem we have, is we have to make these binary choices on, everyone gets this equal pay raise, every state trooper gets this equal pay raise. We have to group them all in together. And that's one difficulty when we, one problem I see when we start centralizing education.
But all citizens of West Virginia are also wanting a pay raise. And I just put that word of caution out for everybody. Having been in the chairman's seat 4 difficult years, many battles, we have been very beneficial with the pipeline development. That stops in a year. We've been very beneficial with the road development. That won't go on forever. We have certain parts of our state that are seeing some nice economic growth, but we have many other areas that aren't. I just put that word of caution of where we may be a couple years down the road. I am going to be voting for that, but with a word of caution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that bill did pass. As we've said, it has a $69 million fiscal note to it. And explain that to us. I mean, we were told on the House comments, the House floor, it's a $105 million investment for all public employees. And I guess that's part of that is in the budget already, in the governor's budget.
Yeah, well, so the $69 million you referenced is really $67 for the school employees and about $2 million for state police personnel. But yeah, as you mentioned, beyond that, the governor promised all public employees a pay raise. But even that gets tricky because the governor can speak for employees who are paid out of the general fund, but employees who get their paychecks basically based on federal dollars or fees like the DMV, tuition like higher education or public broadcasting, other pots, it's hard for the governor to guarantee an amount of a pay raise.
Okay, and then of course that salary bill is now over in the Senate. Earlier we had started recapping the week. We can just go ahead and start picking that up. I was surprised, and maybe you two can, shed some light. Why didn't this bill end up in a conference committee? The big education bill? No, you don't know.
I mean, I really thought that's where it was headed. Yeah, I wrote a whole story based on the premise that it was going to conference committee, and it didn't happen. What I hadn't anticipated based on the votes that we saw
again.
the prior week.
Let's recap, and I'm sorry. Maybe somebody's been.
We need a whole timeline.
Maybe someone's been in Bermuda this week, and they just didn't. We need to catch some folks up. Okay, so we had the Senate's version, went over to the House. The House, took out the educational savings accounts. They made charter schools a pilot program. They made it a lot more acceptable to teachers and different educational organizations. Came back over here. The Senate rejected that, put almost everything
put it all back in and more.
Back in and more. And then we had a strike.
Yeah, that very evening.
And there's some interesting behind the scenes interplay going on there. And the Senate president told me, and Brad was there, some other reporters were there, essentially that he had an agreement. He had talked to the House caucus, and the House Republicans were going to pass this bill that had 7 charter schools, that had a more limited form of ESAs, but had a lot of what the House had taken out in the version it passed. Then the teachers went on strike, and there was about 24 hours between when this agreement was made and then the strike, and the bill comes over, and eventually it gets knocked down, and the Senate president essentially said their word is no good over there. And I know I talked to one of the delegates who was telling me the longer you wait from when you have the votes till you actually make the vote, people get weak knees, people get scared. There was a tremendous amount of pressure.
People look in the galleries and see red-shirted people, hear the chants.
And how much of, how influential was this strike, the presence of teachers here on that ultimate House vote, do you think?
Well, if you take the Senate president at his word, there were, I believe he said he had 52 votes, so he had even a vote to spare. And then somehow there was a 5-member, 10-vote swing just like that, and it seems hard to attribute it to anything other than this sea of red T-shirts that were outside. Even when in moments of silence for prayer or the Pledge of Allegiance, you hear that chant. It can't be blocked by marble walls and wood doors. It gets through, and it's hard to ignore, I'd imagine, when you're casting a tough vote.
I think that one of those key themes is that loss of trust. We heard Minority Leader Miley on the floor saying, I'm going to say something that I've never thought I would ever say on the floor, and it's, I just don't trust the Senate.
Yeah,
it's really bad.
To go back even further, we've been talking about this a month now, and that is a reference to some of the ways it came through. Going out by surprise, and one evening really to even discuss it in Senate Education. Then instead of going to Senate Finance, as we've discussed, there's this committee of the whole that's rarely used. And so all these sort of dramatic twists and turns lead to comments like that, where you've got a prominent member of the House of Delegates saying, I don't trust the other chamber.
And so now that this strike is over and the union leaders, teachers are back in school, of course. How are they feeling about the rest of the session moving forward? Is there any belief that any of those components that both sides could agree on, beyond a pay raise, is there any possibility, even with what's left in the session, is there a possibility of resurrecting and seeing any of those components go through? Incentives for math teachers, other things that people could get behind.
The governor made reference to wanting to do some of those things. The minimum of 1,400 students per county. Even if you got 800 students, that's a funding thing.
What you're saying is the funding formula changes would, in Senate Bill 451, would have raised the floor of student
population,
even population.
For thinly populated counties.
Yes, so 11 of our counties would be raised up. Some of them only have 800 or 900 students, so that's a lot more money going to them, and that was a really good thing.
An estimated $24 million for counseling services and other wellness programs for schools. So these are things that are continuing to get a lot of positive conversation, but procedurally, how do you now backfill them into some bill, amend them into something, or...
Well, I could say I talked to the Senate President earlier today and had asked him about this pay raise bill and whether or not we might see anything popped into it. They're still looking into bills have to be germane. You can only add amendments that are germane or, I guess, relevant to the actual point of the bill. But he said some stuff like differential pay for teachers by geography or by subject, or added incentives for math teachers, like you mentioned, or other hard-to-fill areas. Some of those could potentially get amended in, but he did commit to letting that bill run, letting the House pay raise bill run through the Senate.
All right. We're going to switch gears now and talk about the campus carry gun bill. Now, that is another that we saw it last year. It's back this year. It's been tweaked a little bit. Do either of you want to talk about that before we can just go to, if we're ready to go to that, the president of the West Virginia State University was here, and Randy Yohe caught up with him. Of course, the higher education presidents, officials are adamantly against the Self-Defense Act, Campus Self-Defense Act, and we'll go ahead and listen to that now.
When you introduce weapons into the greater landscape of higher education, you potentially change, taint, and balance intellectual freedom and intellectual discussions and vigorous debate. And so anything that jeopardizes that, I believe, is not something that would be positively impacting higher education. So I have said from the outset that I'm in opposition of it. My presidential colleagues, we all stand in solidarity of that, and that is where we are. That does not mean, and let me be clear, that does not mean that I am anti-gun ownership. As a military veteran, one who has worn the uniform and protected this country, I believe in the Second Amendment, and I believe in gun ownership. I just don't believe it should be in higher education.
And of course, there was a public hearing about this bill. I believe that was last week. On this week, I had Delegate Steele, who a Republican from Raleigh County, who was very much in favor of the bill. We had Barbara Evan Fleischauer, the minority chair of Judiciary. She was very much against it. Jake, what else is notable about the bill, or its support and opposition?
Sure. Well, there was one little interesting parliamentary point on the bill, where the bill was originally just supposed to go to the Judiciary Committee, but the Judiciary Chairman opposed the bill. He voted against it in committee, but when it came to the floor, the Judiciary Committee had made a request that it go to the Finance Committee, and a majority of the House had actually voted down that request. So it was this unusual point of the majority leader and her Republican leadership counterpart, in a civil manner, but going at each other on the floor. And then eventually it did go to the House Finance Committee, as was requested, after some, I think, behind the scenes and what seemed kind of like some tense negotiations. And it was all for naught. As it turns out, the House Finance Committee passed it back up to the floor with what seemed like a pretty quick review.
Almost immediately the same day. Mm-hmm. And so it is up for in amendment stage, or has it gotten to first? I'm kind of behind the ball.
I think they must have done first reading today.
So it'll be on an amendment stage on Monday. I mean, it's just it has an $11.6 million fiscal note estimation that this is what it's going to cost for the safes in the rooms for these guns. The universities are supposed to provide those, and it's just extra police and detectors. It's it's going to be very costly, and of course those are for the universities. It's just interesting, and I don't have a pulse on what is in the Senate, if they're going to receive it with open arms.
All I know is West Virginia University has been very active in dealing with this bill, and I can think of almost no political force more powerful than WVU in this state, but it may be the gun lobby.
Okay, and so as we turn and start looking towards next week, what's on your radar?
God, crossover days next week, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So I guess next week.
Yes, today is 45.
Today's, oh my.
Day 45.
Well, so next week is going to be when things start really stacking up, and every chamber is going to have a lot of priorities that need to get over across the hall before, or otherwise they die a painful death.
Brad, before we look to your next week, you said that you had been in a committee where it was kind of unexpected that Medicaid work requirements was part of the discussion.
Yeah, you never know what may come up, but this was House Finance, and I was in line with teachers and all kinds of other folks looking for the teacher pay raise bill, but what popped onto the agenda was a bill that has been considered in a few other states to require 20 hours of work or volunteer efforts or education for those who are on Medicaid.
And so what are you going to be looking at next week?
Well, more surprises, but how this pay raise bill is received in the Senate, and if there are differences between the two, there are budgetary ramifications, so there could be a collision on the biggest bill of all, the budget.
Excellent. We'll be listening to your work and reading your work. Brad McElhenney of West Virginia Metro News and Jake Zuckerman of the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you
very much. And we'll be back Monday for the Legislature Today. I'm Suzanne Higgins for everyone here at West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.